We talked earlier in this lecture about the ways in which the Revolution weakened slavery throughout the American states, but in particular in Maryland. And now we're going to explore more what lives were like for those free black Marylanders who are now so much more in evidence. There were so many more of them than there used to be. Here's some uh, things to keep in mind. First, the key term is Baltimore in the early Republic. Let me just quickly explain what that means. And free black Marylanders in the early Republic worded the same way. The early Republic is the early period of the United States. People back then referred to it commonly as a republic. And chronology-wise, you can think of that as like 1790 to 1820. All right, use those years, 1790 to 1820. And thinking of those years as a reference point, put these statistics with it. In 1790, 1 out of 13 black people in Maryland was free. And that was after that surge of manumission that began during the Revolution. But those manumissions continued and accelerated, as did black people running away from their enslavement. And by 1810, 1 out of 3 black people in Maryland was free. That's a huge change across 20 years. 1790, 1 out of 13. 1810, 1 out of 3. And a disproportionate amount, soon the majority of those free black people, concentrated in Baltimore. Baltimore was Maryland's biggest city, and free black people often sought out a place where they could find community, solidarity, find each other, if that makes sense. And in Baltimore, the racial geography of the city was not in this period like rigidly racially segregated. That is to say, it's not like there was a quote unquote black neighborhood. Instead, there were little blocks and pockets that were disproportionately free black people. In the little diagram over here, which historians worked hard to kind of catalog this whole little neighborhood, you can see that the green households are free black people and the pink are white households. And so there are stretches where they're just right next to each other. It was not like what comes later in history, if you know what that is, which is a more rigid kind of racial separation in the geography of cities. But not yet here. And most free black people struggled to live a decent economic life. It was hard to find steady employment for most free black people, but easier in Baltimore than in much of the rest of the state. And some free black people found a much greater level of success. Like Charity Folks, who, her story does not play out in Baltimore, but in Annapolis, where she was an enslaved girl, young woman, um, owned by an Annapolis slave owner whose name I don't think you need for the story. Um, and this slave owner's daughters um, got a terrible sickness called the yellow fever, and yellow fever is highly contagious. And the big problem when people got yellow fever was that they needed care, but no one really wanted to care for them because they were very likely to get yellow fever and perhaps die. That yellow fever outbreak had come from those immigrants who came from the Caribbean in 1793. It created a kind of anti-immigrant wave in Baltimore. But in the household where Charity was enslaved, she risked her own life to care for one of the slave owner's daughters who they were kind of friends. It's weird. Um, it is weird to me for an enslaved person and a free person to both feel like they are friends, but humanity's complicated. Um, so she risked her life. The master credited her, Charity that is, with saving his daughter's life, and he then granted freedom to Charity and her children. And they moved to Annapolis. As free people, Charity, in ways that are not entirely clear, to me at least, started to acquire property throughout the city of Annapolis. Quality money management. Um, Her daughter married a free black Annapolis man named William Bishop, and Charity Folks Bishop, that is Charity Folks's daughter, and her husband William became even richer in Annapolis, buying up property around the city. They were like a black power couple in Annapolis in the 1800s. And then there was the incredible Marylander Benjamin Banneker, who may or may not have been of mixed ancestry. There's a set of stories that he had a grandmother who was half Native American, half English. Banneker, in the writings that we have from him, didn't tell that story, so I'm not sure. I used to think that that grandmother story was true, but now I'm just not sure. So regardless, Banneker was identified as a black person in Maryland, but it appears that his mother was free, and so he was born free. And Banneker lived in a Quaker neighborhood and managed as a boy to attend a Quaker school and learn literacy. He was friendly with Quakers in the area who, remember, are turning against slavery in this period, always more against it than other groups. But there was a Quaker family called the Ellicotts, who were particularly important in Banneker's story. And we'll talk more about them in just a moment. But before Banneker met the Ellicotts, he had, as a young man, in 1752 or maybe 1753, he borrowed a watch from a Quaker neighbor, and telling his friend neighbor that he wanted to figure out how it worked. And he brought the watch home, took it apart, laid out all the pieces, wrote notes and diagrams, returned the watch to his neighbor, all working fine, and then, at home, built a clock entirely made out of wooden pieces that he hand carved himself. The clock apparently kept time, accurate time, for decades. This is not the wooden clock that Banneker built, but it is something like the wooden clock that Banneker built. And then, when Banneker would have been in his early 40s, these brothers, the Ellicotts, moved to the neighborhood just like, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 miles west of Baltimore, something like that. These Quaker brothers, John, Andrew, and Joseph, the Ellicotts. And the Ellicotts, Quakers and pacifists and anti-slavery, but ambitious little businessmen, built a series of mills that became highly successful, drew more people to the neighborhood, and created an industrial town around what they had started. Today, this is Ellicott City. So Banneker was friendly with Andrew Ellicott, George Ellicott, and this family gets so tangled for me. I swear I cannot keep track of it, because we got three brothers, right? George, Andrew, and Joseph, and they all named their sons after each other. And so I get totally mixed up and lost. So just please let me get away with the Ellicotts for most of it. Um, I sometimes think that their naming is perfect Maryland, because it works with what the Baltimores, the what the Lords Baltimore used to do, always naming after their father, their son. Okay, so um, the Ellicotts became friendly with Banneker. They lent Banneker books from their library. Banneker did astronomical calculations that predicted a solar eclipse. And through this work, Banneker was invited to join the team that was planning the nation's capital. He was part of the surveying team. I don't understand surveying. The team that was going to plot and lay out the nation's capital. This was controversial. That Banneker, a free black Marylander, was part of this team. It implied that free black people were part of the country. And for that reason, he eventually resigned from the commission. I think it's, I think, one of the Ellicotts, I'll get myself out of that. One of the Ellicotts was the one who had brought him into the commission, and Banneker apparently felt like he was causing trouble for his friend, and so he resigned. This is a stylized rendering of Banneker meeting with George Washington, showing him the plan for the city. For some reason, President Washington's in a military jacket. As it says over here, there is no indication this happened. I just kind of think it's cute. In 1792, Banneker published the first edition of his almanac and sent a copy to Thomas Jefferson, who, remember, had published notes on the state of Virginia just a few years earlier. more on Jefferson's response to Banneker when we continue.